the one way of not doing anything about a situation is feeling guilty about it. Because when people feel guilty about a situation, most usually, instead of doing something practical to change it, they resort to all sorts of symbolic methods of expiation. They go to confession. They see an analyst. They do all kinds of things which will be ways of actually not doing anything about the problem, but feeling all right about it instead. And guilt invariably produces that sort of reaction. It is a destructive emotion. And instead, we need to have a different attitude to our mistakes and to our misdeeds. Walt Whitman always admired animals because they do not lie awake at night and weep for their sins. Our animals are practical, in the real sense, as are children who haven't been taught this extraordinary hang-up of guilt. Because if you have done something wrong, or you have made a mistake, and somebody makes you ashamed of it and guilty, you run around licking the sores of your wounded ego because you feel your pride has been hurt. The first thing to understand is that it is not a serious failing in a human being to make mistakes. Everybody has to make mistakes. There is no way out of it. You can't learn anything unless you make mistakes. We find, for example, in Japan, the Japanese have a terrible hang-up about making mistakes. They, therefore, never have the courage to practice their English properly. They've had 7 years of English in school, most of it very, very badly taught. And it's irrelevant English. They learn all about Shakespeare and Dickens and Thackeray and Thomas Hardy and so on. And therefore they can't carry on an everyday conversation. It's like the way the English study French. All about pens of gardener's ants and things like that. And but they are ashamed to try out their English unless drunk. So if you want to get into conversation with the Japanese in English, you have to go to bars. And then they say university students and so on there will loosen up and talk. Because they no longer have the inhibition, the shame of saying the wrong thing. So likewise, I know a very great anthropologist who was taught music, playing the piano in the same way I was. When I was taught music, the school mom who taught me used to put an India rubber, an eraser it's called in this country, on the top of each hand, so that I would have my hands in good posture. And every time I'd play a wrong note, she'd hit my fingers with a pencil. And this great anthropologist had had a similar sort of musical education. And when confronted with the piano in the presence of an absolutely marvelous teacher in San Francisco, she said she was amazed. He was completely incapable of reading notes. He blocked at everything. So another great teacher of the piano I knew said simply, "You must not be afraid of playing wrong notes. Just forget it. Play it wrong. And then eventually go over it again and you'll eventually get it right. But you must not block. Always keep the same rhythm going, even if you have to slow it down. But keep the proportionate rhythm of one note to another. And if it's the wrong note, play the wrong note, as long as you play something in the right rhythm." So, you know, this is a way of taking away people's blockage, people's guilt and shame about making mistakes. So you absolutely, freedom means, basically, the freedom to make mistakes. The freedom to be a damn fool. And then not to recriminate with yourself when you do finally realize that it was a mistake, but simply don't do it again. Or at least do it less often. So, you know, this is the puzzle. When you go to confession in the Catholic Church, which is an enormous method of inculcating a sense of guilt, very subtle. One says, of course, that Catholics are on the whole less guilty than Protestants. They're more relaxed. And there's some truth in that, but only some. Protestants, of course, have chronic guilt. And you can work this out by a very simple little formula, that when the Protestants in England abandoned what is called auricular confession to a priest, they inserted in their prayer book a general confession in which the congregation all made its confession together. Now, what does a Catholic say when he makes his confession? The formula is, I confess to God Almighty, to Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, Blessed John the Baptist, the holy apostles Peter and Paul and all the saints, that I have sinned exceedingly in thought, word, and deed, by my fault, by my own most grievous fault. Wherefore I beg Blessed Mary, etc., and you, Father, to pray for me to the Lord our God. And the priest says, Almighty God, have mercy upon you, forgive you your sins, and bring you to everlasting life. By the authority of our Lord Jesus Christ committed unto me, I absolve thee from all thy sins in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Period. Now, instead of that, what they had to introduce into the Anglican formulary was, instead of this very simple confession of sins and before the whole company of heaven, an absolute grovel, wherein they say that they have sinned so horribly, and that the remembrance of these sins is grievous unto us, the burden of them is intolerable, have mercy upon us, most merciful Father. And all this cringing and crying, breast beating and wallowing in guilt. And then the priest, instead of saying a simple formula of absolution, quotes all kinds of scriptural texts to prove from the Bible that those who do truly and earnestly repent will be forgiven by God. Because they're very uncertain about it, therefore they have to quote all the authorities. And this absolutely groveling form of confession replaces the old one, because they were a little bit scared about abandoning direct confession of sins to the priest. But now going back to the Catholic problem about guilt, you say, when you have confessed after saying this formula about to all the saints, you confess the specific sins you've committed. And, you know, I stole something, committed adultery 3 times, and so on, whatever it was. And then you say at the end, you know, there's something rather curious about human relationships. We walk through life believing that the people closest to us, those we love, those we trust, have our best interests at heart. And perhaps they do. Or perhaps we've confused their needs with our well-being. Perhaps we've become so accustomed to saying yes that we've forgotten what it feels like to say no. And so we carry on, nodding along, extending ourselves, stretching ourselves thin, until one day we look in the mirror and wonder where we went. When did we become this person who lives entirely for others? Now, I want you to consider something. If you were to sit quietly for just a moment, really quietly, and ask yourself, when was the last time I did something purely for myself? What answer would come? Would it be last week, last month, last year? Or would you discover, with a touch of sadness, that you can't quite remember, because somewhere along the way you stopped mattering to yourself? You became a resource, a solution, a pair of hands to fix what others have broken. And nobody asked if you were tired. Nobody wondered if you needed rest. They simply assumed you'd always be there, ready to give, ready to help, ready to sacrifice. This is what we're going to talk about today, not the grand tragedies of life, but the small, quiet thefts. The ways people ask things of you that steal your peace, drain your energy, and leave you wondering why you feel so empty. Because you see, it's not always obvious. They don't come with a sign saying, "I'm about to take advantage of you." No, they come with tears, with guilt, with phrases like, "But you're my father," or "You're my sister," or "If you loved me, you would." And before you know it, you're carrying a weight that was never meant to be yours. So let me share with you 5 things that people will ask of you. 5 things that sound reasonable on the surface, but are anything but. And more importantly, why staying away from people who make these requests might be the wisest thing you ever do. The first thing people will ask is for you to carry their responsibilities as if they were your own. Have you noticed this pattern? Someone close to you, perhaps a son, a daughter, a sibling, comes to you with a problem. Not just any problem, but their problem. And they present it in such a way that suddenly it becomes your emergency. They say things like, "I don't know what to do," or "I'm really struggling," or "Can you help me?" And because you love them, because you want to be helpful, you step in. You offer advice, you offer money, you offer your time. And what begins as a single favor becomes a permanent arrangement. Before long, you're not just helping. You're doing it for them. You're making their phone calls. You're covering their bills. You're raising their children while they go off to live their lives. And when you dare to suggest that perhaps they should handle some of this themselves, you're met with shock, with hurt feelings, with accusations of being selfish or uncaring. How dare you withdraw your support? Don't you know they need you? Let me ask you something. When did their inability to manage their own life become your life sentence? Because that's what it is, isn't it? You sacrifice your rest, your comfort, your dreams, all so they can continue avoiding what they should have faced long ago. Their own responsibilities. Think of it like this. Imagine you're walking along a path carrying your own backpack. It's heavy enough. It contains your worries, your plans, your needs. And then someone comes along and says, "Here, can you carry mine too? Just for a little while." So you take it because you're kind. But then another person appears, and another, and another, and before you know it, you're bent double under the weight of everyone else's baggage while they walk freely ahead, unencumbered, expecting you to keep up. This is not help. This is exploitation dressed up as love. And the cruelest part is that the more you give, the more they expect. They don't see your struggle because they're too busy enjoying their freedom. And when you finally collapse from exhaustion, they won't be there to pick you up. They'll be puzzled, perhaps even annoyed, that you can no longer serve them. You are not a support system for adults who refuse to support themselves. You are not a safety net for people who keep jumping off cliffs expecting you to catch them. At some point, and that point is now, you have to ask yourself why you're doing this. Is it really love? Or is it fear? Fear of being seen as selfish? Fear of being disliked? Fear of setting a boundary and watching them walk away. But here's what they don't tell you. The people who walk away when you set boundaries are the same people who were never truly there for you in the first place. They were there for what you could provide. And the moment you stop providing, the relationship ends, which tells you everything you need to know about its true nature. So let me be very clear. If someone is asking you to carry what they should be carrying themselves, if they're turning their problems into your problems, if they're making you responsible for their happiness, their finances, their choices, you have every right to say no. Not maybe, not we'll see, no. Because your life is not a rescue mission for people who won't save themselves. The second thing people will ask is to borrow money with no intention of returning it. Oh, this is a delicate one, isn't it? Because money and relationships, they mix like oil and water. Someone you care about approaches you, they're in trouble, they need money. Not a lot, they say, just enough to get by. Just to cover this bill or that emergency or this one-time situation, and they absolutely promise they'll pay you back next week, next month, as soon as things get better. So you lend it because you want to help, because you believe their promise, because you think, well, if I were in their position, I'd hope someone would help me. And at first it feels good. You've solved their problem. You've been the hero. You've proved your love. But then something interesting happens. Or rather, something doesn't happen. The money doesn't come back. And when you gently mention it, they look hurt. They remind you of their struggles. They suggest that you're being insensitive bringing it up. Or they promise again, soon, very soon. And you believe them, because you want to believe them. Months pass, maybe years. And that money you lent has vanished into a black hole. But worse than losing the money is what you've lost in the relationship. Because now there's tension. There's resentment. Every time you see them, you think about what they owe you. And they know you're thinking about it. And instead of addressing it honestly, they avoid you. Or they act as if nothing happened. Or they ask to borrow more. Let me tell you what's really happening here. When someone borrows money with no real plan to return it, they're not borrowing, they're taking. And they're counting on your discomfort with conflict to let them get away with it. They know that bringing up money feels vulgar, feels cheap, feels like you're putting dollars above relationship. So they use your own values against you. Your generosity, your kindness, your reluctance to make things awkward. But think about this. If they truly valued the relationship, would they put it at risk by taking your money? If they truly respected you, would they make promises they have no intention of keeping? Of course not. What they're really saying is that their temporary comfort matters more than your financial security, that their wants outweigh your needs, that you exist as a bank they can withdraw from without ever making a deposit. And here's the painful truth. Lending money rarely solves the real problem. Because if someone is in financial trouble, a loan from you is just a patch. It might cover this month's crisis, but it won't fix the behavior that created the crisis in the first place. Next month, there will be another emergency, another need, another request. And if you've already lent once, they'll see you as an easy target, a reliable source, someone who can't say no. Now, some of you might be thinking, but what if it's a real emergency? What if they genuinely need help? And I would say this. There's a difference between helping someone in crisis and enabling someone's pattern. A real emergency is rare. It's the medical bill that comes out of nowhere, the car breaking down when they need it for work, the unexpected loss of income through no fault of their own. And even then, even in genuine emergencies, a person of integrity will do everything in their power to repay you. They'll set up a plan. They'll make regular payments, even small ones. But if someone is coming to you regularly, if their life seems to be one emergency after another, if they always need just a little more to get by, then you're not dealing with bad luck. You're dealing with bad choices, and your money won't fix that. It will only postpone the inevitable moment when they have to face their own patterns and change them. So what do? You protect yourself. You recognize that lending money to people who won't return it is not generosity, it's foolishness. And you have worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to watch your savings disappear into someone else's bottomless need. Your financial security is not a negotiable item. Your peace of mind is not for sale, and anyone who asks you to risk either is not thinking about your well-being. They're thinking only of themselves. If someone truly needs help, there are other ways to provide it. You can offer advice. You can help them create a budget. You can point them toward resources. But handing over money, especially significant amounts, especially without a clear agreement about repayment, is asking for trouble. And at this stage of your life, trouble is the last thing you need. The third thing people will ask is for you to choose sides in conflicts that have nothing to do with you. This one is particularly insidious because it comes wrapped in loyalty. Someone you love is fighting with someone else you love. Maybe it's your children arguing with each other. Maybe it's a sibling feud. Maybe it's extended family drama. And suddenly, you're pulled in. They come to you, each side, each person, presenting their case, explaining why they're right and the other is wrong. And then comes the question, the trap. Whose side are you on? What a terrible position to be in. Because the moment you choose, you lose. If you side with one, you alienate the other. If you try to stay neutral, both sides accuse you of not caring. And if you attempt to mediate, to bring peace, you often end up blamed by everyone when the peace doesn't hold. Let me tell you what's happening here. These people are not really asking for your wisdom or your help. They're asking you to validate their position. They want you to confirm that they're the victim, that they're justified, that the other person is entirely at fault. And by pulling you in, they're trying to build an army, trying to gather supporters, trying to win not through being right, but through having more people on their side. But think about this carefully. What do you gain by getting involved? Even if you successfully mediate and bring temporary peace, what have you really accomplished? Because people who are truly ready to resolve their conflicts will resolve them with or without you. And people who aren't ready will simply fight again, probably over something just as trivial, and once again expect you to referee. Meanwhile, what do you lose? Your peace, your neutrality, your ability to love both parties without reservation. Because once you've taken a side, once you've said this one is right and that one is wrong, you've created a division that may never fully heal. Every future interaction will be colored by that choice. Every holiday gathering will carry tension. Every phone call will require careful navigation. And for what? To solve a problem that isn't yours, to referee a fight between grown adults who should be capable of handling their own disagreements. That's not wisdom. That's volunteering for unnecessary suffering. There's an old saying, when two people are fighting, the third person who gets involved gets hit by both. And it's true. Because no matter how carefully you try to be fair, no matter how much you try to see both sides, at some point each person will feel you didn't support them enough. Each will remember not what you did for them, but what you didn't do. And your reward for trying to help will be resentment from all directions. So what's the answer? Simple. Don't get involved. When someone comes to you with their grievances, you listen. You acknowledge their feelings. But you do not take sides. You do not become their champion. You do not carry messages back and forth between warring parties like some kind of emotional postal service. You say, with kindness but firmness, this is between you and them. I love you both. I'm not taking sides. Work it out yourselves. Will they like this answer? Probably not. They may push back. They may try to guilt you. They may suggest that if you really loved them, you'd support them, but hold your ground. Because what you're really doing is respecting everyone involved. You're respecting their ability to solve their own problems. You're respecting the relationship by not poisoning it with resentment. And most importantly, you're respecting yourself by refusing to be used as a weapon in someone else's war. Your job at this stage of life is not to fix every broken relationship in your family. Your job is to maintain your own peace. To love people without becoming entangled in their drama. To be available without being involved. And that requires boundaries. The clear, firm, loving boundaries that say, I care about you, but I won't be pulled into this. The fourth thing people will ask is for you to change who you are to make them comfortable. Now we're getting to something really interesting.
Because this request comes in many forms. Sometimes it's direct, sometimes it's subtle. But the message is always the same. You are too much, or not enough, or wrong, or outdated, or embarrassing. And they, in their infinite wisdom, know how you should be instead. Maybe it's your clothing. They say you dress too old-fashioned, or too young, or too bright, or too plain. Maybe it's your opinions. They want you to stop talking about certain things, stop holding certain views, stop being so set in your ways. Maybe it's your hobbies. They think what you enjoy is silly, or boring, or beneath you. Or maybe it's bigger than that. Maybe they want you to change your entire lifestyle, move somewhere else, live differently, be different. And here's what makes this particularly painful. These requests usually come from people who claim to love you. They're not strangers criticizing you from a distance. They're family, close friends, people whose opinions you value, and they frame their demands as concern. They say they're worried about you. They say they just want what's best. They say if you'd only change this one thing, everything would be better. But let me ask you something. Better for whom? Because when someone asks you to change something fundamental about yourself, they're not thinking about your happiness. They're thinking about theirs. They're uncomfortable with who you are. They're embarrassed by you. Or they have some image in their mind of who you should be, and you're not matching it. And rather than accepting you as you are, they want to reshape you into something more convenient for them. Think about what they're really asking. They're asking you to pretend, to put on a mask, to hide the parts of yourself that make you unique. They're asking you to trade your authenticity for their approval. And that's not a fair trade. That's not even close to a fair trade. Because who are you without your quirks, without your preferences, without the things that light you up and make you who you are? Here's what's fascinating. The people who ask you to change are often the ones who haven't done much changing themselves. They haven't examined their own lives. They haven't questioned their own assumptions. They simply follow the crowd, do what's expected, and then demand that you do the same. And when you resist, when you insist on being yourself, they become offended. But you've lived long enough to know something they apparently haven't learned. That the opinions of others are just that. Opinions. Not facts, not laws, not requirements. Just thoughts in someone else's head about how they think you should live your life. And you are under no obligation to live according to someone else's thoughts. Now, I'm not saying you should never grow or change. Growth is beautiful. Learning is necessary. But there's a vast difference between changing because you to become better and changing because someone else can't accept who you are. One comes from within. The other comes from fear. One expands you, the other diminishes you. So when someone suggests you need to be different, pause. Ask yourself, is this about genuine growth, or is this about their discomfort? Is this suggestion actually helpful, or is it asking me to shrink so they can feel bigger? And if the answer is the latter, if what they're really saying is, be less yourself so I can be more comfortable, then the answer is no. Not maybe. Not I'll think about it. No, because here's the thing they don't understand. You've earned the right to be yourself. You've lived through enough years, enough experiences, enough trials to know who you are. You've paid your dues. You've learned your lessons. And if someone can't accept that, if your authenticity is too much for them to handle, that tells you everything you need to know about the relationship. It tells you they love an idea of you more than they love the actual you. And that's not real love. That's not real friendship. That's a transaction where you perform and they approve. And you're too old for performances. So wear what makes you happy. Listen to the music that speaks to your soul. Hold the opinions you've formed through decades of living. Be exactly who you are. And let those who can't accept it find somewhere else to direct their criticism. Because you didn't come this far to start hiding now. The fifth thing people will ask is for you to sacrifice your peace for their comfort. This is perhaps the most insidious request of all, because it doesn't usually come as a direct ask. Instead, it arrives as expectation, as assumption, as emotional manipulation dressed up as relationship. It looks like this. Someone in your life is unhappy. Maybe they're struggling with their choices. Maybe they're in a situation of their own making. Maybe they're just generally dissatisfied with life. And rather than dealing with their unhappiness themselves, they expect you to fix it, to absorb it, to make it your problem. They call at all hours, needing to talk. They show up unannounced, expecting comfort. They lean on you emotionally, financially, practically, until you're bent double under the weight. And if you try to create space, if you try to set limits, they respond with hurt. How can you be so cold? Don't you care? Don't you love me? What they're really saying is this: my emotional state is more important than yours. My needs matter more than your peace. You should sacrifice your serenity so I don't have to deal with my discomfort. And that's not a reasonable ask. That's emotional tyranny. Because let me be clear about something. You cannot carry someone else's emotional burdens without drowning in them. You cannot fix another person's unhappiness. You cannot love them enough, help them enough, sacrifice enough to make them whole. That work, that deep internal work of finding peace and contentment, that's their job, not yours. But many people, especially those who've spent their lives caring for others, fall into this trap. They think love means endless availability. They think caring means never saying no. They think if they just try hard enough, give enough, sacrifice enough, they can save the other person from their pain. But it doesn't work that way. Because what you're really teaching them is that they don't have to take responsibility for their own emotional life. You become their crutch, their emotional support animal. And the more you provide, the more they lean, until you're both falling down. So here's what needs to happen. You need to protect your peace like it's the most precious thing you own. Because it is. Peace of mind, calm, the ability to wake up without dread, to move through your day without constant anxiety. That's not a luxury. That's life itself. And anyone who asks you to give it up for their sake is asking too much. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you become cold or distant. It means you love people without losing yourself. You support them without drowning in their problems. You care without carrying what they should be carrying themselves. And when they push back, when they accuse you of being selfish or uncaring, you stand firm, because you know the truth. Taking care of yourself is not selfish, it's necessary. And anyone who truly loves you would want you to have peace, not give it away. So there you have it. 5 things people will ask of you that you must refuse. To carry their responsibilities, to lend money you'll never see again, to choose sides in their conflicts, to change who you are, to sacrifice your peace for their comfort. And if you're wondering how to actually do this, how to say no when you've spent a lifetime saying yes, here's your answer. You do it with love, but you do it firmly. You don't explain endlessly. You don't justify. You don't negotiate. You simply state your boundary, and then you hold it. Because here's what nobody tells you. The people who respect you will accept your boundaries. They might not like them. They might be disappointed. But they'll respect them. And the people who don't respect your boundaries, well, they've just shown you who they really are. And that's valuable information. You've lived long enough to know that life is short. That time is precious. That peace once lost is hard to regain. So protect it, guard it, refuse to give it away for any reason to any person, no matter how much they claim to need it. Your life belongs to you, not to their expectations. not to their demands, not to their comfort, to you. And the most radical thing you can do it yourselves is simply live it on your own terms. You know, there's a particular kind of person who walks through this world feeling absolutely everything. Not just their own sorrows and joys, but everyone else's too. They're like human tuning forks, vibrating to every emotional frequency within range. We might call them sensitive souls, empaths, or simply those who feel too much. And society has trained these people rather well, hasn't it? Trained them to believe that their gift of sensitivity comes with an unspoken price. The price of being everyone's emotional sanctuary, everyone's confessor, everyone's unpaid therapist. But something rather extraordinary happens when one of these sensitive souls finally stops. Just stops. Stops absorbing everyone's moods like a sponge. Stops saying yes when every fiber of their being screams no. Stops twisting themselves into impossible shapes just to make others comfortable. What happens then is not what you'd expect. They don't become cold. They don't become cruel. They become something far more dangerous to a world built on their endless self-sacrifice. They become awake. Now, let me tell you what's really going on here, because most people completely misunderstand the nature of sensitivity. We think of the sensitive person as someone who's naturally soft, naturally giving, naturally meant to take care of others. But this is where we've gotten it all wrong. That sensitivity, that ability to feel everything, it didn't develop because these souls are meant to be the world's emotional janitors. It developed as a survival mechanism. You see, if you grew up in an environment where you had to read the room constantly, where you had to anticipate someone's mood before they walked through the door, where your safety depended on managing other people's emotions, you learned to feel everything. Not as a gift, but as armor. The sensitive child who could sense danger in a parent's tone of voice, who could feel the shift in household energy before the storm hit. That child survived by becoming exquisitely attuned to everyone else. That here's the trick. They became so good at reading others that they never learned to read themselves. And so we have these sensitive souls walking around, 30, 40, 50 years old, still operating from that childhood program, still believing that their value lies in their usefulness, still convinced that if they just give enough, care enough, sacrifice enough, they'll finally earn the love they've been seeking all along. What a magnificent con job we've pulled on these people. We've convinced them that their sensitivity is a gift they must share with everyone, all the time, regardless of the cost to themselves. We've told them that boundaries are selfish, that saying no is unkind, that taking care of themselves is somehow a betrayal of their nature. But watch what happens when one of these sensitive souls finally hits their limit. And they all do, eventually. There comes a moment, perhaps after years of giving, until they're hollow. Perhaps after one more person takes advantage of their kindness. Perhaps on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when they're sitting alone and realize they can't remember the last time anyone asked how they're really doing. In that moment, something cracks open. Not in a dramatic way, necessarily. Sometimes it's just a quiet thought, a simple question that changes everything. What if I stopped? What if I stopped trying to fix everyone? What if I stopped absorbing everyone's pain? What if I stopped being available for every crisis, real or manufactured? And in that question, there's a kind of terror, isn't there? Because the sensitive soul has built their entire identity around being needed. They don't know who they are without someone to rescue, someone to comfort, someone to save. Their whole life has been organized around this role. And the thought of stepping out of it feels like stepping into an abyss. But here's what actually happens when they dare to step into that abyss. They discover it's not an abyss at all. It's space. Open, vast, liberating space. Space to breathe. Space to think their own thoughts. Space to feel their own feelings without everyone else's emotions crowding in. And in that space, They begin to see things they couldn't see before. They see the patterns. Oh, the patterns become so clear once you stop participating in them. They see how certain people only call when they need something. They notice who disappears when they stop being the one who reaches out first. They recognize the emotional vampires, those charming people who always have a crisis, always need support, always take and never quite get around to giving back. Now this is where it gets interesting, because the sensitive soul doesn't become cynical when they see these patterns. That's what people fear, isn't it? They fear that if they stop being so giving, so open, so endlessly compassionate, they'll turn into some hardened, bitter version of themselves. But that's not what happens. What happens is they become discerning. They develop what you might call conscious sensitivity. They can still feel deeply, still connect profoundly, still offer genuine compassion, but now they choose. They choose where to direct their energy instead of scattering it to everyone who demands it. Think about a spotlight. A sensitive soul who hasn't awakened yet is like a floodlight, illuminating everything and everyone around them while standing in their own shadow. But when they wake up, they become a spotlight, focused, intentional, powerful. They shine their light where it truly matters, where it's genuinely needed, where it will actually make a difference. And yes, this means some people get left in the dark. The people who were only there for the free illumination, who never intended to shine any light back, they suddenly find themselves without their personal sun. And they don't like it one bit. This is when you'll hear the accusations start. You've changed. You're not the person I knew. What happened to you? And the beautiful thing is, the awakened sensitive soul no longer scrambles to reassure these people. They don't rush to prove they're still good, still kind, still the same old reliable doormat. They simply smile and think, yes, I have changed. Finally. Because here's the truth that nobody talks about. The old version of the sensitive soul, the one who pleased everyone, the one who had no boundaries, the one who absorbed everyone's pain like it was their job, that version wasn't real. It was a performance, a survival strategy that got mistaken for personality. The real person was buried underneath all that compulsive caretaking. The real person had opinions they never voiced, had needs they never expressed, had anger they never released, had dreams they never pursued, because they were too busy managing everyone else's emotional weather. And when that real person finally starts to emerge, it's not comfortable. Not for the sensitive soul, and certainly not for all the people who benefited from their self-erasure. There's a period, and it can last months or even years, where everything feels strange and new and slightly terrifying. The sensitive soul has to learn skills they never developed. How to say no without a 3-paragraph explanation. How to disappoint someone without imploding from guilt. How to recognize when someone is trying to manipulate them back into the old patterns. Let me tell you about guilt. Because guilt is the primary weapon used against awakening sensitive souls. The moment they start setting boundaries, the guilt arrives like clockwork. Who do you think you are, putting yourself first? Don't you care about anyone but yourself? I thought you were a good person. And the sensitive soul, who spent their entire life proving they're good enough, feels that guilt like a knife. But here's where the real work happens. They have to sit with that guilt. They have to feel it without immediately trying to make it go away by reverting to their old patterns. They have to ask themselves a crucial question. Is this guilt telling me I've actually done something wrong, or is it just the discomfort of claiming my own life? Most of the time, it's the latter. The guilt is just the death throes of the old identity. It's the part of them that learned to survive by being useful, by being needed, by being the one who fixes everything. And that part is terrified of becoming obsolete. But it must become obsolete. Because, you see, the sensitive soul cannot become who they truly are while carrying everyone else's emotional baggage. They cannot discover their authentic self while wearing the mask of the perpetual pleaser. They cannot hear their own inner voice while amplifying everyone else's needs. And so begins what I call the great sorting. Relationships that were built on the sensitive soul's endless giving start to crack. Some will evolve. The people who genuinely care, who actually see the sensitive soul as a whole person rather than a resource to be extracted, these people will adjust. They'll respect the boundaries. They'll celebrate the changes. They might even feel inspired to look at their own patterns, but others will resist. They'll push back against simply. Used to be speaking in possibly house. They'll try guilt, anger, manipulation, whatever it takes to get their emotional support system back online. And this is where the sensitive soul faces their biggest test. Can they hold their ground, even when people they care about are upset with them? Can they disappoint others to stay true to themselves? This is not an easy thing. The sensitive soul has been trained since childhood to believe that other people's comfort is more important than their own authenticity. They've learned that making waves is dangerous, that standing up for themselves is selfish, that their needs don't matter as much as everyone else's. Breaking this conditioning requires something like courage. Not the dramatic kind of courage, but the quiet, everyday courage of choosing yourself when every cell in your body has been programmed to choose others. Watch what happens to the body when a sensitive soul stops people-pleasing. This is fascinating. For years, maybe decades, their body has been in a constant state of stress. Their nervous system has been processing not just their own emotions, but everyone else's too. They've had headaches, stomach problems, exhaustion that sleep doesn't cure. Their body has been screaming at them to stop, but they kept pushing through because everyone needed them. But when they finally stop, when they finally start saying no, when they finally create boundaries that protect their energy, the body begins to relax. The chronic tension starts to release. The mysterious aches and pains begin to fade. Sleep becomes deeper, energy returns. It's as if the body finally exhales after holding its breath for years. And this makes sense, doesn't it? The body was never meant to process everyone else's emotional waste. The sensitive soul has been functioning like an emotional sewage treatment plant, and their body paid the price. When they stop taking on everyone else's stress, anxiety, and pain, their physical health naturally begins to restore. Now here's something crucial to understand. When a sensitive soul awakens and starts seeing the truth, they don't lose their sensitivity. This is what people fear, and it's simply not true. They don't become numb or disconnected or cold. What happens is their sensitivity becomes conscious rather than compulsive. Before awakening, they absorbed everything automatically, like a sponge in water. They had no control over it. Someone was sad, they felt sad. Someone was anxious, they felt anxious. Someone was angry, they felt responsible for fixing it. But after awakening, something shifts. They can still sense all those emotions. Their radar is just as accurate, maybe even more so. But now there's a pause between sensing and absorbing. A moment where they can ask, is this mine or theirs? Do I want to take this on or let it pass through? They develop what you might call a selective membrane, permeable enough to remain connected, but strong enough to remain themselves. This conscious sensitivity becomes their superpower. They can walk into a room and instantly read the energy, but they're no longer knocked over by it. They can listen to someone's problems with genuine compassion, but they don't leave the conversation carrying those problems. They can love people deeply without losing themselves in the process. This is the gift that was always meant to emerge from their sensitivity. Not endless self-sacrifice, but conscious connection. Not absorption, but genuine empathy. Not drowning in everyone else's emotions, but swimming skillfully through the emotional waters of life. Let me tell you what happens in relationships when a sensitive soul awakens. It's rather remarkable. The people who are using them start to fall away naturally. There's no big confrontation, usually. Just a gradual fading as the sensitive soul stops being available for the old dynamics. The friend who only called during crises stops calling when the sensitive soul stops rushing to rescue them. The family member who demanded constant emotional support finds another target when boundaries appear. The partner who relied on the sensitive soul to manage all the emotional labor either learns to carry their own weight or looks for someone else to carry it for them. This falling away can feel like loss, and in a way it is. But it's the loss of relationships that were never really relationships at all. They were arrangements, contracts where the sensitive soul provided unlimited emotional resources in exchange for the crumbs of connection. When those contracts end, space opens up, and into that space come different kinds of people. People who see the sensitive soul as a whole person, not a resource. People who give as much as they take. People who respect boundaries instead of testing them. People who love the real person, not the performing persona. These new relationships feel different. They feel lighter somehow, even though they're deeper. There's less drama, less crisis, less exhausting emotional management. There's more ease, more reciprocity, more genuine joy. The sensitive soul discovers something astonishing. Real connection is actually restful, not draining. Love that's genuine doesn't require you to abandon yourself. True friendship means both people take care of each other, not one person doing all the caretaking. Now I want to talk about anger, because this is where things get really interesting. The awakening sensitive soul often discovers a tremendous amount of anger buried under all that compulsive niceness. Anger at being used, anger at being taken for granted, anger at all the times they said yes when they meant no, anger at the people who exploited their kindness, anger at themselves for allowing it. This anger can be shocking. The sensitive soul has spent their whole life being nice, being understanding, being patient. They've suppressed their anger so thoroughly that they forgot it was there. But it was there all along, festering under the surface, leaking out as resentment, bitterness, chronic stress. And when this anger finally surfaces, the sensitive soul often panics. They think, oh no, I'm becoming the kind of person I never wanted to be. I'm becoming angry and bitter and hard. But this is a misunderstanding. The anger isn't making them into someone new. It's revealing someone who was always there, but never had permission to exist. And this anger, when it's acknowledged and expressed appropriately, is actually healthy. It's the part of them that knows their worth. The part that refuses to be used. The part that says, no, enough, I matter too. The anger is not their enemy, it's their teacher. It shows them exactly where their boundaries were violated. It gives them the energy to establish new ones. It burns away the false self and reveals the real one underneath. But the sensitive soul has to learn to work with this anger skillfully. Not to explode at everyone who ever wronged them. Not to become bitter and suspicious of all human connection. But to use the anger as information, as fuel for change, as the fire that transforms them from pleaser to person. Here's something beautiful that happens. As the sensitive soul heals, as they learn to honor their own needs and set healthy boundaries, they often find themselves wanting to help others do the same. But the way they help is completely different now. Before they helped by doing everything for people, by absorbing their pain, by fixing their problems. They helped from a place of compulsion and codependency. Now they help by holding space, by believing in people's ability to solve their own problems, by sharing what they've learned. Without trying to save anyone, they become what you might call a conscious guide rather than a compulsive rescuer. And this actually helps people far more than the old way ever did. Because when you rescue people, you reinforce their helplessness. But when you believe in their capacity to figure things out, you help them find their own strength. The awakened sensitive soul understands that the greatest gift they can give others is not to do things for them, but to trust them to do things for themselves. Let me tell you about something I call the return to self. After the initial awakening, after the boundaries are set, after some relationships end and others transform, there's a period where the sensitive soul has to learn to be alone with themselves. Really alone. Not lonely, but in solitude. For the first time in their life. There's no one they're trying to please, no one whose emotions they're managing, no one they're performing for, just them. And this can be uncomfortable at first, because without all that external noise, they have to face their own thoughts, their own feelings, their own desires. They have to ask themselves questions they've been avoiding. What do I actually want? What do I actually think? Who am I when I'm not being useful to someone? These questions can feel terrifying, because the sensitive soul has spent so long defining themselves through others that they don't quite know who they are on their own. But this is where the real treasure lies. In that solitude, in that space where they're not performing or pleasing or fixing, they begin to meet themselves for the first time. They discover their own preferences, their own opinions, their own quirks. They find out what makes them laugh when no one's watching, what moves them when there's no one to impress, what lights them up when there's no one to please. They discover that they're interesting, that they have depths they never had time to plunge, that they're actually quite good company. And something wonderful happens. The sensitive soul falls in love. Not with someone else, but with themselves. Not in a narcissistic way, but in a gentle, appreciative way. They start to see themselves as worthy of the same care and attention they've always given others. They start treating themselves with the same compassion they've extended to everyone else. They start honoring their own needs with the same dedication they brought to everyone else's. This self-love is revolutionary. Because once you genuinely love yourself, you can no longer accept relationships that require you to abandon yourself. Once you know your own worth, you can no longer settle for breadcrumbs of affection. Once you've tasted the peace of being alone with yourself, you can no longer tolerate connections that create chaos. The sensitive soul who has awakened and returned to themselves becomes unshakable in a way they never were before. Not because they've hardened their heart, but because they've finally found their center. And from that center, they engage with the world in a completely new way. They give from overflow rather than depletion. They help from inspiration rather than obligation. They love from wholeness rather than neediness. They connect from authenticity rather than performance. This is what I call sovereign sensitivity. The ability to feel everything while remaining yourself. The capacity to care deeply without losing yourself. The gift of being both open and boundaried, both soft and strong. And here's the beautiful paradox. When the sensitive soul stops trying to please everyone, when they stop absorbing everyone's emotions, when they finally put themselves first, they actually become more effective at helping others. Not less. More. Because they're no longer helping from woundedness. They're helping from wholeness. They're not rescuing people to feel valuable. They're supporting people because it genuinely moves them. They're not fixing problems to avoid their own. They're sharing wisdom they've earned through their own healing. The awakened sensitive soul becomes a kind of lighthouse. They stand on solid ground, shining their light steadily, illuminating the path for those who are ready to see. But they don't chase ships in the fog. They don't abandon their post to rescue every vessel in distress. They trust that their steady light is enough, that those who are meant to find their way will find it. This is true service, Not self-sacrifice, but self-offering. Not depletion, but contribution. Not martyrdom, but mastery. So what happens when a sensitive soul stops pleasing everyone and starts seeing the truth? They don't become less. They become more. More authentically themselves. More genuinely connected. More powerfully present. More radiantly alive, the true self that was always there, buried under all that people-pleasing, finally emerges. And it turns out that true self is magnificent. Not because it's perfect, or enlightened, or beyond all human struggle, but because it's real, beautifully, messily, courageously real. And in a world full of masks and performances, that realness is the most precious thing of all.
It is a curious thing, this tendency we all share, the urge to hold on to people, to hold on to ideas, to hold on to the stories we tell about who we are and what the world is. We clutch at memories of the past, as though replaying them might somehow make them last forever. We grip tightly at visions of the future, as if our grasp could bend time to obey our plans. And yet, in all this holding, we discover a strange weight. Instead of safety, it gives us a kind of suffocation. Instead of comfort, it makes us anxious, always fearing the moment when our grip might slip. Why do we hold on so desperately? It is because we have been taught that to let go is to lose. If I let go of this relationship, I will be abandoned. If I let go of this belief, I will be adrift. If I let go of control, everything will fall apart. And so, with clenched fists, we drag the baggage of yesterday into today and try to pack tomorrow into the same suitcase until we are exhausted under the sheer weight of it. But life, you see, is not meant to be carried like this. Life is a river, not a stone. It moves, it flows, it shifts. And when we try to grasp the current, we only end up with water slipping through our fingers. The tighter we hold, the more we realize we cannot truly hold at all. Consider for a moment the simple act of breathing. You breathe in, and then you must breathe out. If you try to only inhale, clinging to the air as though to lose it would mean to lose your life, you will suffocate. The very act of living requires release. It requires the rhythm of in and out, of taking and giving, of holding and letting go. And yet, when it comes to our attachments, we try to live as though we can only inhale, never exhale. The result is the same suffocation, but this time in our minds and our hearts. Look also at nature's trees. Each autumn, they shed their leaves, releasing what no longer serves them. They do not argue with the season. They do not cling to what has had its time. And because they let go, they are renewed. Spring comes and new leaves burst forth. Imagine if the tree resisted. Imagine if it gripped every leaf in panic, crying, "I cannot let this one go. It is mine. It defines me." What would happen? The tree would rot, unable to grow, unable to flourish. It is only in release that life finds its rhythm. But we, unlike the tree, tell ourselves stories. We imagine that if we let go, we will fall into emptiness. We imagine we are separate little beings standing against the tide of existence, and that if we do not hold on, the tide will wash us away. And so we resist, and we resist until the struggle becomes unbearable. Think of how we hold on to relationships that have already ended in spirit, afraid of the silence that might follow. We hold on to old identities. I am this kind of person. I cannot change. I must always live this way, even when the skin has grown too tight, like clothes from childhood that no longer fit. We hold on to resentments, to grievances, to past mistakes, dragging them behind us like heavy stones, all the while wondering why we feel so tired. But the truth is, letting go is not the opposite of love, nor the opposite of care. To let go is not to reject. It is to recognize the natural movement of things, just as waves rise and fall, just as days begin and end, just as lives appear and dissolve, so too does every form, every moment, follow the rhythm of arising and passing. To resist this rhythm is to resist life itself. It is like trying to stop a river with your hands. You may feel, for a brief instant, that you are succeeding, but soon the current pushes past, stronger than your grip, indifferent to your effort. And then you are left exhausted while the river flows on. But why do we resist so fiercely? Because we mistake holding for control. We believe that if we grip tightly enough, we can preserve what we love, secure what we fear to lose, or shape the future to our design. And yet, have you noticed? The things we cling to most fiercely are often the very ones that slip away. Think of the lover smothered by another's insecurity, who leaves not because of lack of love, but because they cannot breathe under the grip. Think of the person so obsessed with controlling every detail of their life that they leave no room for surprise, no room for spontaneity, and so they find themselves trapped in the very order they desired. Think of the one who cannot release the memory of a wound, and so carries it, reliving the pain again and again, as though it were happening now. In all of this, the fear of letting go is the fear of death in miniature. For to let go is to allow something to end, to allow a moment to pass, a form to dissolve, a self to change. And because we fear the great death, the dissolution of our own body, our own ego, we fear all the little deaths along the way. We imagine that by holding on, we can resist the great tide, keep ourselves intact. But in truth, it is the clinging that breaks us. You may notice this in the smallest of things. Try to hold water in a tight fist, and it escapes. Hold it gently, with an open palm, and it rests with you for a while. Try to clutch at love, and it suffocates. Let it breathe, and it grows. Try to force your life into rigid certainty, and it rebels. Allow it to flow, and it carries you further than you could have planned. So the problem is not that life takes things away. The problem is that we refuse to see that life is always taking and giving, always flowing, always changing. To demand permanence in a world of movement is to fight against the very essence of what is. The suffering of holding on is not only in the loss itself, but in the constant tension, the vigilance, the anxiety of guarding what cannot be guarded. Like a man clutching a rope that is fraying in his hands, we exhaust ourselves trying to prevent the inevitable. And in doing so, we miss the beauty of what is still here, still alive, still present. And so, you may notice, fear grows not from reality itself, but from the stories we weave. If I let this go, I will be nothing. If I release control, life will collapse. These are shadows of thought, not truths. For in fact, you are already letting go in every moment. You let go of each breath, or you would die. You let go of each moment, or time would freeze. You let go of sleep each morning, or the day could never begin. Letting go is already the rhythm of your being. You cannot resist it forever. You can only blind yourself to it. The great paradox is that by clinging, you do not preserve life, you smother it. By resisting change, you do not secure safety, you create fear. By holding on, you do not keep things as they are, you hasten their decay. And so, we must see clearly, the fear of letting go is born from an illusion, the illusion that we are separate from the flow, that life is something happening to us rather than as us. But once you see that you are the river itself, the need to clutch at each drop begins to fade. The beginning of wisdom is to see the cost of holding on, to see that it is not safety, but weight, not love, but suffocation, not freedom, but prison. Only when this is seen can the heart begin to loosen its grip. And so,
as you sit here listening, perhaps you can feel in your own life what it is you are clutching. Perhaps a person, perhaps a story, perhaps an image of yourself. Feel the tension of it, the way it weighs upon you. Notice that it is not the thing itself that weighs you down, but the clinging. And see, if only for a moment, that there may be another way. If holding on binds us in tension, then letting go is the beginning of freedom. Yet, many hear this and immediately recoil. If I let go, won't I lose everything? Won't life spin into chaos? Won't I fall into nothingness? But you see, this is the illusion. For letting go does not mean falling into emptiness, it means falling into life. It means aligning yourself with the rhythm that has been carrying you all along. Think again of breathing. You let go of the breath not to die, but to live. The release makes room for the next inhalation, the next renewal. Imagine if you refuse to exhale, clinging desperately to the air as though your survival depended upon it. You would suffocate. The irony is clear. You live because you let go, again and again. This rhythm of release is everywhere. The trees let go of their leaves so that new growth may appear. The snake sheds its skin, or else it cannot expand. The earth itself shifts, quakes, moves, so that new mountains may rise, new valleys may form. To let go is not a failure of life, but its very condition. Now, notice what happens in you when you release. Perhaps you have experienced it already. You cling to some resentment, some injury from the past. You replay it, you nurse it, you rehearse the words you should have said, and then, one day, perhaps out of exhaustion, you let it go. And what do you feel? Relief, lightness. The world, unchanged in its outer form, suddenly appears brighter. The sky seems wider, the air easier to breathe. Nothing has changed but the grip of your hand, and in that small gesture, everything is transformed. So letting go is not loss, but transformation. It is not the end of love, but the beginning of freedom within love. For when you hold someone too tightly, you do not love them, you possess them. And possession strangles. To love is to let another be, to allow them the freedom of their own movement, their own becoming. And when you grant this, you discover something extraordinary, that love does not vanish when released. It grows, it deepens, it breathes. Letting go of control is much the same. You may imagine that unless you manage every detail, life will collapse into disorder. But in truth, life is already happening without your command. Your heart beats without your orders, your cells divide, your blood flows, your breath moves, the earth spins, the stars burn, all without your intervention. Control is a story, a game we play with ourselves. Life does not wait for your instructions. So what happens when you release this compulsion to control? At first, fear, because the ego imagines it is the master, and to surrender is to die. But beneath that fear is a discovery that life carries you more gracefully than you could ever carry yourself. Like a swimmer who finally stops thrashing and allows the water to hold them, you realize you are buoyant. You do not sink into chaos. You float into harmony. Now, letting go does not mean apathy. It does not mean turning your back on life or abandoning care. It means participating without clinging, engaging without grasping. It is like dancing with a partner. If you clutch at them, the dance is stiff and awkward. If you collapse and refuse to move, the dance cannot happen at all. But if you allow, give and take, guiding and yielding, the dance becomes alive, spontaneous, free. So it is with life. You are not to be a puppet, dragged helplessly, nor are you to be a tyrant, forcing every step. You are to be a dancer, moving with the rhythm, listening, responding, trusting. This is what the Chinese call wu wei, not forcing, not straining, but moving with the grain of the universe. Now, one of the greatest fears in letting go is the fear of death. We cling to life, imagining that if we grip hard enough, we can stave off the inevitable. But death is not the enemy. Death is the great letting go, and without it, life would not be. Just as sleep is necessary to renew the body, so death renews the cycle of existence. The leaf falls, but the tree lives on. The wave dissolves, but the ocean remains. And so, when you let go in small ways of a thought, of a grievance, of a fear, you are practicing the art of dying. You are rehearsing the great surrender that will one day come to us all. And in practicing it, you discover that death is not destruction, but renewal. What falls away makes room for what is to come. Even time itself teaches this. You cannot cling to a single moment. Try as you may to preserve it, the moment passes. The laughter fades, the embrace ends, the sunset gives way to night. And yet, this is not a tragedy, for the very passing makes room for what is next. If the day did not end, the night could not begin. If the note did not fade, the song could not continue. Life is not in the holding of one instant, but in the continuous flow from one to another. So, letting go is not abandonment. It is participation in the rhythm of existence. It is to see that you are not separate from the flow, standing against it, but the flow itself. You are not the hand clutching at the river. You are the river. And once this is seen, the fear begins to loosen. Now, notice in your own life where this might be so. Perhaps there is a person you cannot release, even though the time has passed. Perhaps there is a version of yourself you cling to, though it no longer fits. Perhaps there is a fear you rehearse endlessly, as if preparing for it could prevent it. And see, just for a moment, what it would feel like to open your hand, not to push it away, not to destroy it, but simply to release. Feel the lightness in that image, the freedom. This is the invitation of letting go. And here is the curious thing. When you let go, what is real does not vanish. Love remains, but it is free. The self remains, but it is flexible. Life remains, but it is lighter. What vanishes is the tension, the anxiety, the weight of clutching at shadows. You lose nothing but your chains. So the practice of letting go is not about throwing life away, but about finally receiving it. For as long as your hands are clenched, they cannot receive. Only the open hand can be filled. Only the relaxed heart can feel joy. Only the surrendered mind can discover peace. This is why the sages and mystics, again and again, spoke of surrender, not as defeat, but as liberation, not as loss, but as gain. To surrender is to see that you were never in control to begin with, and that this is not bad news, but the best news possible. For it means you are carried, sustained, supported by something far greater than the little I you believed yourself to be. So when you are afraid of letting go, remember this: you have been letting go all along. Each breath, each moment, each night's sleep, you have already practiced surrender countless times, and each time, life has continued. The fear is a story, not a reality. And when you release even a little, you discover the great secret. Life holds you. The ocean does not drop its waves. The sky does not abandon its clouds. The earth does not reject its children. You belong always. And letting go is the way you remember it. So let yourself soften. Let yourself breathe. Let the clenched fist open. The guarded heart relax. The worried mind fall silent. You will not fall into nothingness. You will fall into everything. For letting go is not the end. It is the beginning of freedom. Have you ever noticed that the more you try to figure life out, the less you seem to understand it? You sit there, head full of thoughts, tracing circles in your mind, trying to make sense of everything, what to do, what to say, where to go, how to become who you think you should be. You believe that if you could only think a little harder, if you could only solve the puzzle, peace would finally arrive. But the harder you think, the farther peace seems to drift. Because the mind, for all its brilliance, is a terrible place to live when it won't stop moving. Overthinking is one of the quietest prisons in the modern world. You can't see the bars, yet they surround you. You can't hear the locks, yet they click into place every time you question yourself again. What if I'm wrong? What if I fail? What if I make the wrong choice? The mind loops and loops, convinced that control will bring safety, unaware that control is the very thing causing its suffering. You become trapped in the illusion that understanding more will make life easier, when in truth, life only feels heavy because you keep trying to carry it with thought alone. There's a strange irony here. The same mind that creates the problem is the one you rely on to fix it. You keep asking the overactive mind to think its way out of its own confusion, like asking a storm to calm itself by blowing harder. It's an endless cycle analysis. Doubt, reassurance, then more analysis again. And though you tell yourself you're being careful or responsible, what you're really being is afraid. Fear hides behind thought. Every overthinker is at heart someone trying to feel safe. You don't want to make a mistake, don't want to be hurt, don't want to lose control, but the more you try to avoid pain by planning around it, the more you live in the shadow of it. Life becomes one long rehearsal for a moment that never comes. You're preparing to live instead of living. And so, your mind keeps spinning, always revisiting the past, always predicting the future, rarely allowing you to be here, in the only place life actually happens. You might sit at a cafe, coffee in hand, sunlight spilling through the window, yet your body is the only part of you that's present. Your thoughts are somewhere else entirely, chasing what-ifs and should-haves. You've forgotten what it means to simply exist. The problem isn't that you think. Thinking is beautiful when it's used as a tool. The problem is that you don't know how to put the tool down. The modern mind has become addicted to solving. It treats every sensation, every emotion, every uncertainty as something to fix. But not everything broken needs mending. Some things are only asking to be felt. Imagine standing by a river. The current is strong, and you drop a small leaf into it. You watch as the water carries it effortlessly downstream. That's how life moves when you stop resisting it. But if you try to catch the leaf, to control where it goes, the moment you grab at it, you disturb the water. The surface ripples, and what was once simple becomes messy. Overthinking does the same. It disturbs the current of being. You've likely noticed that the best insights, the most peaceful moments, come not when you're trying to think your way toward them, but when you've finally given up. It's when you stop struggling, when you let go of the mental tug of war, that clarity suddenly appears, like sunlight breaking through clouds that were never solid to begin with. But most people don't trust that process. They believe that letting go means becoming passive, lazy, or careless. In truth, it's the opposite. Letting go is the highest form of intelligence. It's the moment you stop trying to make life obey you and instead begin to listen to it. Because life, like music, was never meant to be figured out. It was meant to be played. Think of how you listen to your favorite song. You don't analyze every note or measure. You let it wash through you. You feel it, and that's why you enjoy it. But when you turn life into a problem to solve, you lose the melody. You start dissecting beauty instead of dancing with it. Overthinking blocks the life you want because it builds a wall between experience and awareness. You can't taste a meal while describing it in your head. You can't love deeply while questioning whether you're doing it right. You can't live fully while narrating your every move. The commentary becomes louder than the life itself. The truth is, your mind will never think its way into peace because thought is born from division, from the sense of me and the world. this and that, should and shouldn't. Real peace can only appear when that division ends, when you stop seeing life as something to manage and start seeing it as something to meet. When you are caught in overthinking, you live in delay. Every moment is postponed until the next decision is made, the next question answered. But life doesn't wait for conclusions. It unfolds now. It moves with or without your permission. You can spend your entire life preparing for it and never actually meet it. Some people spend years waiting to start, waiting until they feel ready, confident, healed, certain. But readiness never arrives in the way they imagine. Certainty is not the gate to life. It is the grave of possibility. The more you demand to know before acting, the smaller your world becomes. To live freely, you must be willing to not know. You must dare to walk without a map, because the truth is, the mind can only plan based on what it already knows, and what it already knows is too small for what life wants to give you. The overthinker never leaves the circle of familiarity. They keep spinning inside the known, terrified of stepping into the unknown, unaware that the unknown is where life actually begins. What if the life you want is already here, hidden beneath the noise of your thoughts? What if the freedom you seek is not somewhere in the future, but waiting quietly beneath all the analyzing, the worrying, the self-questioning? What if the only thing separating you from peace is the belief that you must earn it through understanding? At some point, every overthinker reaches a breaking point, that sacred exhaustion, where the mind finally admits defeat. You can't think anymore, you can't plan anymore, you've tried every angle, every solution, and still, life doesn't obey your designs. And in that surrender, something miraculous happens. You stop fighting, you stop thinking your way out, and for the first time, you simply breathe. In that breath, the fog begins to lift. You realize that the peace you were chasing wasn't hidden in answers. It was hidden in stillness. The answers were never the destination. They were the distraction. What you were searching for was not knowledge, but silence, the kind that doesn't come from solving, but from seeing. To overthink is to live half a life, to exist in potential but never in presence. You wait for a perfect understanding that will never come. Meanwhile, life waits for you to return to it. When you finally do, when you let the noise fall away, you discover that you were never truly lost. You were simply too loud inside to hear the quiet truth beneath it all. That life does not need your permission to unfold. It only needs your attention. And when that attention returns to the present moment, even for a breath, everything shifts. The problems shrink. The noise softens. You realize the river was never against you, it was carrying you all along. There comes a moment, somewhere after the storm of thought has exhausted itself, when silence doesn't feel like emptiness anymore. It feels like home. You sit quietly and realize that all along, the noise wasn't protecting you, it was hiding you from yourself. You thought thinking would make you stronger, safer, wiser. But now, in the stillness that follows all that effort, you see that wisdom was never waiting inside your thoughts. It was waiting beneath them. The mind believes that if it keeps running, it can outrun fear. But fear is not behind you, it is the very motion of running itself. You can't escape fear by thinking faster, planning harder, or knowing more. The more you run from uncertainty, the more it defines you. True peace begins when you stop trying to outrun life and instead allow it to catch up with you. Overthinking is a symptom of mistrust. You don't trust life to unfold without your supervision, so you hover over it like a nervous parent, constantly correcting, anticipating, preparing. But the beauty of existence is that it doesn't need to be managed. The flowers bloom without being told how. The stars move without instruction. The heart beats without your permission. You are part of that same intelligence, yet you spend your days doubting it. You might say, if I stop thinking, I'll make mistakes. But mistakes are part of the dance. They are not interruptions, they are steps. Every so-called mistake you've ever made was life moving you toward something you couldn't yet see. If you look closely, you'll notice that some of your most painful wrong turns became the very paths that revealed your strength. Overthinking tries to prevent mistakes, but in doing so, it prevents growth. To live without overthinking is not to live without thought. It's to let thought play its proper role as a servant, not a master. When a thought is needed, it arises. When it's done, it dissolves. The problem is not in thinking, but in identifying with the thinker. When you believe you are your thoughts, you drown in them. But when you see that you are the awareness noticing them, suddenly they lose their power. They pass through you like clouds across a vast sky. To rest in that awareness is to see thoughts for what they are, temporary movements in something much larger, much quieter, much freer than the mind. Once you begin to live from that space, life stops feeling like a problem to be solved and starts feeling like an experience to be lived. You no longer wake up with the need to control every outcome. You start to notice the subtle rhythm that runs beneath everything, the way events unfold, the way timing seems to align when you stop forcing it. It's as if life had been waiting for you to stop interfering. This is where real intelligence begins. Not the kind measured by speed or logic, but by depth, by the ability to listen. The universe is always speaking, but most people can't hear it over the noise of their own analysis. When you quiet down, the guidance you were searching for begins to emerge naturally. Not as a voice from above, but as intuition, a quiet knowing that moves through you like wind through leaves. You don't have to think your way into it. You simply allow it. You trust that life, like breath, knows what it's doing. You inhale, you exhale, and everything takes care of itself. Overthinking says, I must make life happen. Awareness whispers, life is already happening. And the difference between those two is the difference between struggle and flow. There's a certain magic in surrendering to that flow. You start noticing how everything connects, how every person you meet, every obstacle you face, every moment of doubt or delay fits into a larger tapestry that the mind could never have designed. Overthinking reduces life to fragments. Awareness restores it to wholeness. You begin to see that nothing was ever missing. The job you didn't get, the person who left, the opportunity that slipped away, they weren't mistakes. They were movements in a pattern too vast to grasp from where you stand. Overthinking tries to flatten that mystery into a straight line. But life is a circle. Everything returns in its own form, in its own time. When you understand this, you begin to relax. You begin to breathe differently. You stop asking life for guarantees and start meeting it as it is. That's when the overthinking mind finally dissolves, not because you've conquered it, but because you've outgrown it. You've learned that control is a poor substitute for trust. And here's the great paradox. When you stop trying to control everything, things actually begin to align. Not because the world suddenly bends to your will, but because your will no longer resists the world. You move with life instead of against it. You act not from fear, but from clarity. This is what people mean when they talk about flow, that effortless harmony between doing and being. It's the artist painting without self-consciousness, the athlete lost in motion, the child playing without purpose. It's the moment when the watcher and the watched become one. And the beautiful part is that it's not rare. It's not reserved for special people. It's the natural state of being that overthinking has simply obscured. Once the noise quiets, you realize the stillness was there all along. The mind will still whisper from time to time. It will still ask, are you sure? What if this goes wrong? But now you see those questions for what they are, old echoes of a self that believed it needed control to feel safe. You can smile at them, thank them for their concern, and move on. The mind becomes a companion rather than a captor. Eventually, you come to see that life's wisdom was never hidden in complexity, but in simplicity. You don't need more certainty. You don't need more answers. You need less noise. Peace is not something you find after thinking through every possibility. It's what remains when the thinking stops and awareness begins. It's what arises when you no longer stand between yourself and life. So, when your mind starts spinning again, when it replays old conversations or rehearses endless outcomes, pause. Don't fight it. Just notice it. Watch the current of thought without diving in. Feel the body breathing, the heart beating, the presence underneath it all. In that moment, something ancient wakes within you. You remember that you were never the storm. You were the sky. And the sky does not need to stop the storm to remain at peace. It only needs to remember its own vastness. This is the essence of living beyond overthinking, not that you control the mind, but that you no longer confuse yourself with it. You let thoughts come, you let them go, and in between, you live. You finally live. Because the life you've been trying so hard to figure out was never waiting for you to think your way into it. It was waiting for you to feel your way back into now. And when you arrive, really arrive, you realize that life had never gone anywhere. You were the one lost in thought. The river never stopped flowing. You just stopped trusting it. And now you can float again. Every moment spent chasing becomes a moment unseen, unlived, unappreciated. But when you realize that this very moment, this breath, this heartbeat, is the only enough that ever existed, something inside you softens. You no longer fight the flow. You start to dance with it. The meaning of money is in its movement. It is not meant to be hoarded, but circulated. It is energy in motion. And when you let it move, it brings life. When you freeze it, it begins to die. The same is true for joy, for love, for creativity. These things only remain alive when shared. That is why generosity has always been the mark of a truly wealthy spirit. Because generosity is not about giving away money. It is about releasing attachment. It is saying, I trust life enough to let this go. And the universe, being an echo of that same trust, often responds in kind. Real wealth does not come from possessing more, but from needing less. You become infinitely rich the moment you stop trying to compensate for your sense of lack. You realize that all this time, you were never chasing money, you were chasing yourself. You were searching for the feeling of being enough. And the moment you recognize that you already are, the chase ends. This does not mean you abandon ambition or stop working. It simply means you stop confusing effort with worth. You work not to become something, but to express what you already are. That shift, subtle as it seems, transforms everything. Suddenly, your actions feel lighter. You stop competing and start creating. You stop worrying about outcomes because you understand that what truly matters was never at stake. The real purpose of money is play, to facilitate exchange, creativity, and connection, not to define identity. When you begin to treat it as play, you participate in the great rhythm of life without losing yourself in it. You can work hard, earn much, even enjoy luxury, but you no longer confuse the mask for the face. Look around the world and you will notice that the happiest people are not necessarily those who have the most, but those who are most alive. They use money like musicians use notes, as a means of expression, not measurement. They can laugh at losses, smile through uncertainty, and still trust the unfolding of things. You may not control every rise and fall of fortune, but you can always control your relationship to it. You can choose to see money as movement rather than meaning. You can choose to treat wealth as a guest rather than a god. The moment you stop believing that happiness lies somewhere beyond the next financial milestone, you begin to wake up. You realize that the true treasure of life is not stored in banks, but in awareness, in the ability to see beauty in what is already here. Imagine living from that space. You still earn, still plan, still invest, but you no longer suffer through it. You no longer chase freedom, you express it. Because the free person is not one who has escaped the system, but one who no longer believes it defines them. Wealth and freedom are not opposites. They only appear that way when you forget who you are. When you remember, everything becomes simple. You earn when you need to, you rest when you can, and you allow life to unfold in its rhythm. And then, quite mysteriously, abundance finds its way back to you. Not because you demanded it, but because you finally stopped blocking it. You stopped clutching at life and started trusting it. The fool chases freedom through control. The wise simply realize that control was never needed. And in that realization, you discover the most profound truth of all. You were never meant to be rich. You were meant to be free. They guide your choices, shape your dreams, and limit your joy. But fear is not truth. It is imagination without awareness. The mind projects its doubts into the future, forgetting that the present moment contains no threat. When you bring awareness back to now, fear dissolves like mist in sunlight. And finally, there is the place of achievement, the grand illusion that you must earn your right to exist. From childhood, you were taught that success is the price of worthiness. You were told that meaning is found in doing more, having more, becoming more, but this endless striving leaves you exhausted and hollow. For every mountain you climb, another appears. Every goal achieved brings only temporary satisfaction before the next desire takes its place. You cannot reach peace through achievement because peace was never missing. It was simply forgotten beneath the noise of becoming. When you live in these places long enough, you begin to forget that they are not who you are. You start to believe that comparison, control, and fear are the normal conditions of life. You even take pride in your suffering, calling it ambition or discipline. But there comes a moment, sometimes in exhaustion, sometimes in silence, when something within you whispers, there must be more than this. That whisper is the beginning of awakening. It is the voice of the true self calling you home. The journey back to your real nature does not begin by running from these places, but by seeing them clearly. Seeing the illusion is already freedom from it. The one who observes comparison is not comparing. The one who sees fear is not afraid. The awareness that witnesses the storm is not the storm itself. This is the essence of awakening. Not to become something new, but to remember what was never lost. As long as you identify with what changes, you will suffer with every change. But when you rest as the awareness behind it, you find a peace that cannot be shaken. The world continues to move. The body continues to age. The stories continue to unfold. Yet there is a stillness that remains untouched. That stillness is your true nature. It is not a belief or a philosophy. It is the very ground of your being. And when you begin to live from that awareness, something extraordinary happens. The comparisons lose their power. The fears lose their grip. The noise of the world softens into background music. You move through life not as someone trying to win, but as someone who has already arrived. You act, but without anxiety. You care, but without attachment. You love, but without possession. This is what it means to remember yourself. Most people will never take that step. They will continue to chase and collect and compare until their final breath. But you, if you are listening closely, may already sense that another way exists. Not a path that you must find, but one that reveals itself when you stop running. The moment you stop trying to become, you return to being. And there, in that simple presence, you rediscover the truth you had been searching for in every corner of the world. Your true self was never hidden. It was only overlooked. Like the silence behind every sound, it was there all along, waiting for you to remember. There comes a time when you grow tired of your own struggle, not because you've given up, but because you've finally seen through the illusion that there was ever something to win. You begin to notice that every chase ends in the same place, every success fades into the next desire, and every fear eventually dissolves into the air it came from. And in that quiet realization, something begins to awaken. You start to sense that freedom is not a matter of fixing life, but of seeing it clearly. When you see clearly, you no longer need to escape the world. You simply stop mistaking the noise for yourself. The mind will still produce thoughts, emotions will still rise and fall, but the difference is that you no longer identify with them. You begin to live from a deeper stillness, an inner clarity that watches the play of life without being carried away by it. Most people believe awakening is about adding something more knowledge, more practice, more light, but true awakening is the opposite. It is a gentle undoing, a falling away of everything that is not you. You begin to shed the unnecessary, not through effort, but through recognition. Like mist burned away by the sun, illusion fades the moment it's seen for what it is. You realize that you were never the restless seeker trying to become something more. You were the space in which the seeking was happening. You were the quiet awareness watching the entire performance unfold. Once this begins to dawn in you, the world starts to feel lighter. You no longer walk through life as if it were a battlefield. You move as if life were music, unpredictable, fluid, alive. You begin to understand that harmony was never about control, but about listening. The same way a musician must surrender to the rhythm, you learn to trust the natural movement of your own existence. The mind, of course, will resist this. It will say, if I stop striving, I'll fall behind. If I stop controlling, everything will collapse. But this fear is built on misunderstanding. It assumes that you are the one holding life together. In truth, life is holding you. The same intelligence that turns stars, that breathes your lungs, that beats your heart without your permission, that is what's living you. To fight against it is to struggle against your own nature. When you allow life to flow through you rather than trying to command it, something miraculous happens. Effort becomes grace. Work becomes play. Even pain becomes a form of transformation. You begin to see that everything that once felt like punishment was only life trying to teach you how to let go. The world becomes your mirror. Wherever you look, you see reflections of the self you used to believe you were. But instead of reacting, you begin to smile. You realize that everyone is caught in the same dream, trying to protect the same illusions. And compassion arises not as an obligation, but as a natural understanding. You no longer need to change people. You see that they, too, are being guided home in their own time. There's a beautiful simplicity that returns to your existence. You no longer need grand philosophies or complex practices. Presence itself becomes your teacher. When you drink tea, you taste life in the tea. When you walk, you feel the ground as part of yourself. When you breathe, you realize the air entering your lungs has already belonged to countless others before you. Everything begins to shimmer with the same aliveness that once seemed hidden. You discover that joy was never something to achieve, it was what remained when striving stopped. The same world that once felt chaotic now feels sacred, because you are no longer separate from it. You are not a visitor in this universe. You are the universe momentarily playing the role of a person. Many people spend their whole lives trying to find meaning. They ask, why am I here? But the question itself is the confusion. You are not here to find meaning. You are here to experience being. Meaning is not something given to you by the world. It arises naturally when you are present. When you are fully here, life takes care of itself. You stop living in the past and future because you see how unreal they are. The past is memory, the future is imagination, and neither can ever be touched. The only place life actually exists is now. This moment, simple and ordinary as it may seem, contains everything. All the beauty, all the mystery, all the peace you were searching for has been waiting here all along. When you live from this awareness, even the so-called dangerous places lose their power. Comparison becomes gratitude because you finally see that everyone's path is their own. Control becomes surrender because you trust the intelligence behind every unfolding. Identity becomes play because you know you are not the mask but the one wearing it. Distraction turns into wonder because every sound and sight becomes a reminder of your own presence. Perfection becomes unnecessary because you realize that the world was never broken. Fear turns into curiosity because what once seemed threatening now becomes an invitation to awaken. And achievement becomes expression, a joyful way of participating in life rather than a desperate attempt to justify your existence. When you live like this, there is no conflict between being and doing. You can act in the world without losing yourself in it. You can work, create, build, and care. But your peace no longer depends on results. You are free in success and free in failure because both are seen as passing clouds in the same vast sky of awareness. People sometimes ask, if I stop chasing, won't I lose motivation? But true motivation doesn't come from fear or lack. It comes from love. When you love something, you do it naturally. You don't have to force yourself to create, to explore, to share. Life moves through you as inspiration, not obligation. That is what it means to live freely. And as you rest more deeply in that state, gratitude begins to bloom. You start to see the gift in everything, even in loss, even in uncertainty. Because you realize that life's impermanence is not a problem to be solved, but a miracle to be witnessed. Every ending makes room for another beginning. Every change reminds you that nothing was ever meant to be held forever. In that realization, the world no longer frightens you. You can stand in the middle of chaos and remain still inside. You can watch the rise and fall of fortune and not lose your balance. You can experience pain and not close your heart. This is the strength that arises from awakening, a strength that looks soft to the world but is unbreakable within. When the ego finally quiets, you discover that what remains is love. Not sentimental love, not the love that comes and goes, but the boundless love of awareness itself, the recognition that everything you see, everything you feel, is made of the same essence as you. And when you live from that realization, every encounter becomes sacred. Every person becomes a reflection of yourself. Every breath feels like a prayer. In the end, there is nowhere to go. No goal left to chase. No trap left to escape. You see that the whole journey was a circle leading you back to the present moment. Back to the simple truth that you are, and that is enough. Freedom was never about breaking chains, but about realizing they were never real. And when you finally see that, you smile. You smile because you understand what all the teachers, sages, and poets were trying to tell you. That the self you were trying so hard to find was the one that had been listening all along. You were never lost. You were simply dreaming. And now you are awake.